Hello lovely viewers, you are most welcome to our channel Poetry Online. In this video, we shall be presenting to you the detailed analysis of the poem New Tongue by Elizabeth L.A. Kamara. Kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to get updates on all our new videos. Once again, let us assure you of a very interesting discussion. Get ready for this lesson. Elizabeth L.A. Kamara is the second of three children born to Mr. and Mrs. John M. Kamanda, who taught her the values of education and humility. She grew up in the East End of Freetown and attended Annie Walsh Memorial School. She has an honors degree in English Language and Literature and Masters of Arts, both from the University of Sierra Leone. She is the head of the English unit and currently lectures the key genres of literature in English in the Department of Language Studies at Fora Bay College, the University of Sierra Leone. And today, we are going to study her poem, New Tongue. The impact of Western education and colonialism on Africa has been profound, particularly in terms of the loss of identity and culture. The introduction of Western education by colonial powers often sought to supplant traditional African knowledge system, leading to a significant erosion of indigenous cultures and identities. Colonial education in Africa was designed to indoctrinate the local population with European values, languages, and belief systems. This often meant the marginalization and denigration of indigenous languages, histories, and cultural practices. As a result, many Africans were taught to view their own traditions as inferior or primitive, leading to a disconnection from their cultural heritage. Furthermore, the curriculum of colonial education often excluded or distorted African history and knowledge, further alienating Africans from their own heritage. This process of cultural alienation has had far-reaching effects, contributing to the loss of traditional skills, knowledge, and customs that were once central to African identity. In addition, the imposition of colonial borders and administrative structures disrupted existing social and political systems, leading to further disintegration of traditional identities and cultural practices. The legacy of colonialism continues to impact African societies, with many struggling to reconcile the dual influences of traditional values and Western ideas. Just like the poet Elizabeth L.A. Kamara, contemporary African scholars and activists are working to reclaim and revitalize indigenous knowledge systems and cultural practices. Efforts to decolonize education and promote multiculturalism are gaining momentum, aiming to restore a sense of pride and connection to African heritage. The coming of the white man to Africa brought many things along with it, one of the most enduring being their culture or ways of life. The European culture introduced strange and surprising things to Africans. Most of such things were easily rejected, while a few, especially material artifacts, were enthusiastically embraced by both commoners and nobilities. As Africans got more and more exposed to Western ways through Western education, they found more aspects of it very fascinating, yet nonsensical or absurd. They saw the African culture in the light their white masters would have them do. They saw them as primitive, retrogressive, and even barbaric. The setting of the poem, New Tongue, is Africa. This poem is written at a time when the new generation of Africans have made conscious effort to distance themselves from the African tradition, language, and general ways of doing things. It was a period when most of the new African educated elites, especially in West Africa, were eager to look like, behave like, sound like, and act like the whites, as they saw the white man's culture as a standard for measuring civility and excellence. The contemporary African society is in an era of grace for white values and civilization, as well as a conscious attempt to denigrate African values or look down on the few who cherished it among the new educated elites. Psychologically, it is a time when most of the new generation grappled with cultural complex and inferiority complex for that matter. This poem, New Tongue, is set in post-colonial times. The traditional order has been supplanted by the new but foreign culture. Africans in this situation see a huge contradiction, and those who are conscious of it live with the emotions of humiliation. The reason is that both tradition and modernity subsist in the African. The poem, New Tongue by Elizabeth L.A. Kamara focuses on the popular theme of clash of cultures in African literature. It explores an aspect of the African culture and Western or European culture in terms of their general ways of life. In doing this, the poet uses communalism or collectivism, which is practiced in Africa, and individualism, which is practiced in Western countries. Through a comparison of the attributes of these cultures and what they are capable of engendering, the poet uses the behavior of the current generation to draw a contrast with what used to happen years ago in Africa. This poem, New Tongue, by Elizabeth L.A. Kamara, explores the themes of cultural erasure, assimilation, and the loss of traditional heritage. The speaker describes a new generation that has abandoned their cultural roots and embraced the new borrowed culture, dismissing their past and their elders. The new generation of Africa, instead of being sad, are proud copycats, imitators, impersonators, or lookalikes of the whites. They have completely discarded their cultural heritage and the hot pursuit of Western ideologies and culture. The poem uses vivid imagery and metaphors to convey the idea that this new generation is disconnected from their heritage and is instead focused solely on the new adapted culture. The new tongue and the new dances symbolize the abandonment of traditional ways, while the minds battered into new modes and shapes suggest a forced assimilation. The poem also touches on the idea of cultural appropriation, with the speaker noting that the new generation glories in their newness of a borrowed tongue and culture. The image of borrowed shoe dancing and borrowed minds parting the Red Sea highlights the disconnect between the old and new ways of doing things. In New Tongue, Elizabeth L.A. Kamara satirizes the overdependence on European standards as a way of life by the current generation of Africa. The poem speaks against all who have abandoned the African culture to adopt the Western culture. There appears to be a sharp conflict between the African traditional values and the modern European values. The problem here is that most Africans copy directly or indirectly from the European culture. They do not consider whether or not it is suitable for them, their culture, and their environment. The blind and unreasonable imitation of the European culture is greatly ridiculed by L.A. Kamara. First of all, she satirizes the copying of English mannerisms without any consideration of its compatibility or suitability for the African life. Both thematically and structurally, the poem makes use of contrast. The main idea of the poem is developed around two contrasting cultures or two contrasting ideologies, that is, communalism and individualism. The major theme of the poem revolves around conflict of cultures. The cultures in question are the European culture and the African culture, which are represented in the poem by individualism and communalism. Elizabeth L.A. Kamara in this 46-line poem bemoans the abandonment of the African culture and tradition by Africans of this current generation and the total acceptance of foreign values without really cross-examining those values and their compatibility to the African society. The poem laments the total disinterestedness or apathy of the young generation of Africa in their own culture as they adopt borrowed practices and make a caricature of their own cultural values, which were central to the existence of their ancestors. The final stanza of the poem creates a sense of desolation and loss, with a strange coolness descending like snow and the gusts of wind destroying the old ways, leaving nothing but debris in its wake. The poem ends with the image of the new generation moving forward without looking back, leaving their cultural heritage behind. Structurally, New Tongue by Elizabeth L.A. Kamara is a free verse poem with 5 uneven stanzas with irregular rhythm. Stanza 1 has 13 lines, stanza 2 has 11 lines, stanza 3 has 5 lines, stanza 4 has 12 lines, and stanza 5 is made up of 5 lines. The poem condemns the disregard, disrespect, and lack of interest by the new generation of Africa for the old ways, the breaking away of family and friendship ties, the general indifference towards the loss of cultural heritage, the imagery of ashes strewn into the bottomless sea as fishes swim by, careless of the loss, points to the indifference and disinterestedness of the new generation of Africans to their past, which was caused to the lives of their ancestors. The new generation of Africa have intentionally and purposefully dissociated themselves from their tradition. They have rejected the prized place of elders in the African society and disrespected their old age and wisdom. They have also blocked their ears to the old ways. That is, they have intentionally and calculatingly distanced themselves from everything African. They instead celebrate a borrowed culture and enjoy the status of being wannabes, imitators, copycats, and lookalikes of another man's culture. They preach individualism in place of communal spirit that characterizes the African society. They hang the last lock of their culture in order not to be labeled or branded uncivilized or backward. Let's take our first reading of the poem. They speak in a new tongue and dance new dances, minds battered into new molds and shapes. Their eyes revel in the wonder of the new, and brazen bound hearts with impregnable chains. The old songs are disregarded dreams, remnants of a past, ties of families and friendship, loosened, broken, bent, the ashes tuned into the bottomless sea. As fishes swim by, careless of their laws, mindful of where they dare, a new generation, careless of bonds, of family, of tradition, of heritage, they care not nor revere the old. Their minds tend inwards, only inwards, like the insides of claws that marry the bodies of mankind. No room for elders. No, not even the edge of their minds. Their ears block to the old tongue and ways of doing things, glorying in their newness of a borrowed tongue and culture. Every man for himself, by himself, of himself. A strange coolness descending like snow-covered mountain, or like bathing at the back of the house on a rainy July day. The gusts of wind falling trees, cutting roofs away, tugging skirts, and swirling debris in the air. The borrowed shoe dance. Their borrowed minds parted the Red Sea long ago. They hang the last lock of their culture and glide into the future without a backward glance. Let's now take a stanza by stanza analysis of the poem, starting with the first stanza. They speak in a new tongue and dance new dances, minds battered into new molds and shapes. Their eyes revel in the wonder of the new, and brazen bound hearts with impregnable chains. The old songs are disregarded dreams, remnants of a past. Right from the opening lines of the poem, the speaker introduces us to the subject matter of the poem, which is the rejection of the African culture by the new generation, represented by the third person plural pronoun, they. The speaker makes it clear that this new generation has adopted a foreign culture which she refers to as the new. Not only have they adopted the language and dances of the white man, but they have also adopted the mindsets and ideologies of the whites. That is to say, the total rejection of the African culture and everything it embodies. The poem begins by describing a shift in language and culture with a focus on the adoption of new ways. The use of new tongue and new dances suggests a significant transformation. The image of minds battered into new molds and shapes implies a forced assimilation. Now, let's consider some lines in this very first stanza. Minds battered into new molds and shapes clearly informs readers that this new generation go through a whole lot of pain and suffering just to transform from being African to Western. This is similar to programming something that has been programmed already. That is, they have to go through a lot of suffering and pain just to transform from being African to Western. Their minds have been battered into new molds and shapes. That is to say, their mindsets have equally changed from the ideologies that hold Africans together to ideologies which are strange and surprising. This line suggests a total assimilation of the foreign culture, irrespective of whether it is compatible with the African society or not. Their eyes revel in the wonder of the new. This line talks about how fascinating and attractive this new generation of Africa find a foreign culture. The new generation of Africa takes great pleasure in imitating or mimicking foreign mannerisms and values. This stanza emphasizes the attachment of the new culture with their hearts bound to it. Embrace and bound hearts with impregnable chains means that they are so absorbed in the foreign ways that they cannot be detached or disconnected from it. This line suggests a strong attachment to the new culture. The African culture, referred to as the old song, is considered a disregarded dream by the new generation. The use of remnants at this point is very important. Remnants are part of something that is left after a great part of it is used, removed, or unwanted. So, this is how the new generation of Africa see the African culture. To them, a great part or a valuable part of the African culture has been used, removed, and now it remains unwanted. So, they have to chase after Western values. That is to say, what is left of the past is ignored by the current generation as all their energies are channeled towards imitating and mimicking foreign behaviors and mannerisms. The old songs are dismissed as mere dreams, indicating the disconnection from the past. The phrase, remnants of a past, suggests a sense of loss and abandonment. Ties of families and friendship, loosened, broken, bent, the ashes thrown into the bottomless sea. As fishes swim by, careless of their loss, mindful of where they dare. The second part of the first stanza clearly informs readers of the poem of the effects of this total assimilation of the Western culture or the foreign culture. Africans have seen strange and surprising things which have destabilized the African society. The African culture, which is characterized by communalism or we feeling, where everyone is his or her brother's keeper, now preaches the opposite of this. The new generation preaches individualism, that is, everyone for himself. These lines emphasize the new generation's disregard for traditional bonds and heritage. The use of careless highlights their lack of concern for the past. The result of propagating and popularizing the ideology of individualism in Africa is that family and friendship ties have been loosened, broken, and bent as people no longer take these relations seriously. They now firmly believe and endorse the idea of individualism. The imagery of ashes thrown into the bottomless sea as fishes swim by, careless of the loss, points to the indifference of the new generation of Africans to their past. This new generation has made conscious efforts to distance themselves from the African culture and everything it embodies. There is a general sense of indifference towards the African culture by the new generation of Africa. Ashes thrown into the bottomless sea symbolizes an irretrievable loss of cultural heritage. As fishes swim by, careless of the loss, highlights the indifference of the new generation to the loss, or their apathy to the loss. Ties of family and friendship, loosened, broken, bent, suggest a disconnection from their cultural roots. Let's now move to the second stanza of the poem. A new generation, careless of bonds, of family, of tradition, of heritage, they care not nor revere the old. Their minds turn inwards, only inwards, like the insides of cloths that marry the bodies of mankind. The second stanza of the poem goes on to describe the new generation as careless and apathetic to family ties and friendship ties. They care less about bonds, traditions, and heritage. They show no regard for old bonds and values. They also do not revere the old. The use of careless highlights their lack of concern for the past. The speaker here laments that blindly imitating Western values has posed significant dangers to the African societies, impacting various aspects of identity, social dynamics, and well-being. By blindly adopting Western cultural norms and practices, there is an erosion of the indigenous African traditions and values. This results in the loss of cultural identity and a disconnect from the rich heritage that defines African communities. The uncritical adoption of Western cultural trends also leads to ethical and moral dilemmas. The unreflective embrace of certain aspects of Western popular culture, such as the promotion of individualism, has detrimental effects on the societal values and norms of Africa. As a result of their wild pursuit for the Western culture and the need to adopt Western mannerisms, the speaker says their minds turn inwards. In essence, when a person's mind turns inwards, it signifies a redirection of their attention to illogical or absurd ideas. The image of minds turning inwards suggests a focus on individualism. Let's now move to the next stanza. No room for elders. No, not even the edge of their minds. Their ears blocked to the old tongue and ways of doing things. The third stanza of the poem talks about the total disrespect this new generation has for the elders. There is no room for the elders to operate. The elders have been excluded or exempted from everything in modern society. The elders, with their wisdom and experiences, are not given room and space to operate. The new generation of Africa show no regard for old bonds and values. They also do not revere the old, something that the African continent is well known for. Respect for old age is one of the hallmarks of Africa. Africans respect old age since intelligence, wisdom, and experience is associated to old age in the African society. The new generation claims they know it all. Hence, their ears are blocked to the old tongue or language and the general ways of doing things. They have consciously ignored the African culture and general ways of doing things. This stanza highlights the lack of respect for traditional wisdom and culture. The image of ears blocked suggests a deliberate refusal to listen to the past or the words of wisdom coming from the elders. Glorying in their newness of a borrowed tongue and culture, every man for himself, by himself, of himself. A strange coolness descending like snow-covered mountain, or like bathing at the back of the house on a rainy July day. The gusts of wind falling trees, cutting roofs away, tugging skirts, and swirling debris in the air. The fourth stanza of the poem talks about how the sons and daughters of present-day Africa go about flouting or exhibiting genuinely acquired foreign languages and culture as the benchmarks of civility, modernity, and civilization. The new generation of Africa are eager to look like, behave like, sound like, and act like the whites as they see the white man's culture as the standard for measuring civility and excellence. The use of glorying suggests a sense of pride in their new identity. That is, the new generation of Africa are proud of being imitators, impersonators, and lookalikes of another man's culture. They not only flout their newly acquired language, they also preach the idea of individualism, where every man is for himself and careless about what happens to the next man, which is contrary to the values and norms of the African society, where communalism and collectivism is the hallmark. There is a historical allusion in line 31 to 34, where the poet reuses Abraham Lincoln's historic definition of democracy, government of the people, by the people, and for the people, to suit her definition of individualism and the new culture as every man for himself, by himself, of himself. These lines suggest the focus of individualism. In the African society, it is believed that a child belongs to the society and not just his or her parents. Hence, everyone in the community or society takes it upon his or herself to be his or her brother's keeper. However, this newly acquired ideology preaches individualism and to a large extent selfishness. This stanza employs vivid imagery and powerful similes to convey a sense of detachment and emotional coolness associated with the cultural shift. The imagery of snowy mountain and a rainy July day evokes a feeling of isolation and mayhem caused by the cultural changes. Line 38 to 41 also uses vivid imagery and dynamic verbs to depict the disruptive and forceful nature of cultural change, where gusts of wind may be seen as new cultural practices uprooting an established order. Gusts of wind, falling trees, cutting roofs away, tugging skirts, and swirling debris in the air. This stanza creates an image of desolation. The image of strange coolness and snow suggests a sense of detachment. This stanza continues the image of desolation with a focus on destruction. The use of gusts of wind and debris creates a sense of chaos. The image of gusts of wind, fallen trees, and debris swirling in the air suggests an urban setting, possibly a city experiencing rapid change and development. Let's now move to the last stanza of the poem. The borrowed shoe dance. Their borrowed minds parted the Red Sea long ago. They hang the last lock of their culture and glide into the future, without a backward glance. Elizabeth L.A. Kamara concludes her poem, New Tongue, proudly exuding their newly adopted culture. The poet alludes to the parting of the Red Sea by Moses. Only in this case, it presents the new generation the opportunity to bury the ways of their ancestors and never looking back. The image of borrowed shoes highlights cultural appropriation. The final lines of the poem suggest a complete break with the past, with no looking back. Red Sea, referencing the biblical story of the parting of the Red Sea. This was an action of God at the time that rescued the Israelites from the pursuing forces of Egypt. God divided the Red Sea so that the Israelites could walk across the dry seabeds. Once they were safely across, God closed the passage and drowned the Egyptians. By saying that their minds parted the Red Sea long ago, the speaker informs readers that all the imported ideologies and absurd ideologies from the Western culture have created a barrier between the new generation and their culture. In essence, this barrier prevents them from going back or ever revisiting their past. Parting the Red Sea highlights the disconnect between the old and new ways. The mention of parting the Red Sea and hanging the last lock of their culture suggests a final erasure and eradication of their cultural heritage and an irreversible move into the future that has no ties with the past. It can be interpreted to mean the finality of this cultural shift and assimilation. The past is thus cast aside like an ancient burden, a necessary sacrifice for proper assimilation into the new foreign culture. Let's now consider the setting of the poem. The setting of the poem, New Tongue, by Elizabeth L.A. Kamara, is not explicitly stated, but based on the language, imagery, and themes, it can be inferred to be Africa, but the exact geographical setting is unknown, which gives the poem a broader coverage as it speaks to all the countries in Africa and not just the poet's country. The mention of the bottomless sea and the Red Sea suggests an African context, as the Red Sea is between Africa and Asia. The themes of cultural erasure, assimilation, and the adoption of a new tongue suggest a post-colonial setting where a previously colonized country is grappling with its cultural identity. The image of gusts of wind falling trees and debris swirling in the air suggests an urban setting, possibly a city experiencing rapid change and development. The poem's focus on the adoption of a new language and culture suggests a setting where cultural transformation is underway, possibly a place with a complex history of colonization. The poem references the imposition of a new tongue and the erasure of traditional culture, echoing the historical legacy of colonialism and imperialism in Africa. It highlights the process of cultural assimilation, where a dominant culture suppresses or erases the cultural identity of a marginalized group. The new tongue does not only represent a new language of power, but also a culture imposed upon a people who were forced to abandon their native language and culture. Tone and diction. The tone of the poet in this poem can be said to be melancholic. The poem has a melancholic tone with a focus on loss and longing. The poem is reflexive, with a focus on the past and its impacts on the present. This poem has a critical tone, with a focus on the power of dynamics of language and culture. The tone of the poem is equally nostalgic, with a focus on the loss of traditional culture and language. The poet, Elizabeth L.A. Kamara, uses simple and concise language in a poem, New Tongue, which creates a sense of directness and intimacy. The tone and diction work together to create a sense of intimacy and directness, drawing the readers into the speaker's world. The use of metaphorical language and imagery adds depth to the poem, while the melancholic and reflective tone creates a sense of longing and loss. Let's now consider the major themes of the poem. Loss of identity. The dangers of blind imitation. Cultural erasure and assimilation. Loss of traditional heritage. Transformation and change. Let's now discuss the literary devices employed in the poem New Tongue by Elizabeth L.A. Kamara. Metonymy. We come across metonymy in the following lines. new tongue, old tongue, borrowed shoes. Repetition. There is a repetition of words and phrases like new, old, careless, borrowed, and new tongue in the poem. Synecdoche. Their eyes revel in the wonder of the new. Simile. Their minds turn inwards, like the insides of cloth that marry the bodies of mankind. A strange coldness descending like snow-covered mountain, or like bathing at the back of the house. Allusion. There is a historical allusion in line 31 to 34, where the poet Elizabeth L.A. Kamara reuses Abraham Lincoln's historic definition of democracy as the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, to suit her projection of individualism and the new culture as every man for himself, by himself, of himself. There is also a biblical allusion in line 43 of the poem, where the speaker makes reference to the parting of the Red Sea by Moses. This biblical allusion metaphorically depicts a significant division between the old and new generations, mirroring the Israelites parting the Red Sea to escape their past. Parallelism of family, of tradition, of heritage. For himself, by himself, of himself. Personification, the insides of cloths that marry the bodies of mankind. Thanks for watching this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video.